Hello everybody! In today's episode of Thomas and Friends in 5, we're going to veer off the topic of specific locomotives and rolling stock from the Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends universe and talk about the Whyte Notation system. As you may know from watching our previous videos, we always mention the Whyte Notation wheel classification on all the steam locomotives we review. But what exactly is the Whyte Notation? The Whyte Notation is a method by which steam locomotives are classified by their wheel arrangement. That should clear everything up, right? Okay, what do we mean by wheel arrangement? Let's break it down. This wheel classification system was devised in 1900 by Frederick Methven Whyte, who was a mechanical engineer for the New York Central Railroad. On a basic steam locomotive, there can be up to 3 types of wheels. I say up to 3 types because a steam locomotive doesn't necessarily have to have all 3 types. But let's go ahead and review the 3 types of wheels. The first type are called the leading wheels, the second type are called the drive wheels, and the third type are called the trailing wheels. It's probably easier to talk about the drive wheels first, since every steam locomotive has a set and they're the easiest to identify. They're the bigger wheels connected to the piston and each other by steel rods. They're called the drive wheels because they receive the power and the form of motion from the piston. The piston moves in a reciprocal or back and forth motion. Not very helpful on its own if you're trying to turn a wheel. But the piston is connected to what's called the main rod, which does 2 things. It connects the piston to the drive wheels, and it also converts that reciprocal back and forth motion into rotary or circular motion. That rotary motion is very helpful when trying to turn a wheel. Lastly, if there's more than one set or axle of drive wheels, they're connected by the connecting rods or side rods, so all the drive wheels turn in unison. The drive wheels tend to be the largest set of wheels on the locomotive as compared to the leading wheels and the trailing wheels. Now that's a very basic overview, but hopefully you get the idea behind drive wheels. Now that we know which set of wheels are the drive wheels, let's talk about the set of wheels called the leading wheels. The leading wheels are contained in their own assembly or structure called a bogie in the UK or a truck in the US and are located in front of the drive wheels. The leading wheels are typically smaller than the drive wheels and are not powered. The basic purpose of the leading wheels is to guide the locomotive through curves in the track and to provide stability and support for the locomotive. Leading wheels can be referred to as leading axles, pilot wheels, or front pony wheels. The last set of locomotive wheels are the trailing wheels. The trailing wheels are also contained in their own assembly or structure called a bogie in the UK or a truck in the US and are located, as you might have guessed, behind the drive wheels. The trailing wheels are also typically smaller than the drive wheels and are not powered. Although there are some cases where booster engines are attached to the trailing wheels, but we'll ignore those for the purposes of this video. The purpose of the trailing wheels is to support the weight of the firebox and cab. They can also provide stability by helping distribute the locomotive's weight. Trailing wheels can also be referred to as trailing axles. Now that we know more about the different types of wheels on a steam locomotive, deciphering the Whyte Notation is actually pretty easy. It should be noted that the tender wheels are not counted in the Whyte Notation, just the locomotive wheels. The basic Whyte Notation is simply a series of numbers separated by dashes. For example, 4, 6, 2. But there is a pattern to these numbers. Reading left to right, the first number in the series is always the number of leading wheels, even if that number is 0. The last number is always the trailing wheels. The numbers in between represent the sets of drive wheels. Using the 4-6-2 example, this locomotive would have 4 leading wheels, 6 drive wheels, and 2 trailing wheels. Remember that you have to count the wheels on both sides of the locomotive. Gordon is an example of a 4-6-2 locomotive. Let's look at a few other examples. Thomas, for example, is an 0-6-0 locomotive. This means he has no leading wheels, 6 drive wheels, and no trailing wheels. This wheel configuration is usually found on shunting locomotives. Edward is a 4-4-0. Emily is a 4-2-2. Emily is interesting because she only has 1 pair of drive wheels. The configurations that consist of 3 numbers are the most common. But it does get a little bit more complicated, though the principle is still the same. Let's talk about some examples. Duplex locomotives have multiple sets of drive wheels on a rigid frame. This example would be a 4-4-4-4. Notice there's 4 numbers here instead of 3. The first number is still the leading wheels, and the last number is still the trailing wheels, but the 2 middle numbers account for the 2 sets of drive wheels. You may also see a Whyte notation with a plus sign inserted. For example, 462 plus 264. These locomotives essentially have two engine units, separated by a cab, boiler, and firebox, collectively referred to as a bridge. Garrett locomotives are good examples of this wheel arrangement. The last special case we'll talk about is when a diesel-electric locomotive is assigned a Whyte notation. The most common example of this are the smaller shunting diesels, where the drive wheels are connected by a side rod similar to the steam locomotives. Examples of these would be Devious Diesel, a BR Class 08, or Salty, a BR Class 07, both diesel-electric locomotives used for shunting. Okay, I think that's going to do it for this video. I think we've probably gone a little overtime as it is. Let us know in the comments if we've gotten anything wrong or if you just want to add to the conversation. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode of Thomas and Friends in 5.